So Bob, we have a little surprise for you. This is Bob Nickelsberg, famous in Brooklyn for karaoke, and he's going to give us an example of his work today. Dina's got the tunes lined up. I think we're going to be good. Nobody told you? No?
No.
You didn't prep anything? I'm sorry.
Nothing.
Bob Nickelsberg is a photojournalist who has worked for some 30 years for Time magazine, primarily as a contract photographer. And he was based, in the beginning at least, in El Salvador. And he'll tell you in detail, but he's also done significant work in other places, and most especially Afghanistan. And he's going to show us his book, which you can see above us, and there's a couple of copies for sale at the student discount price of $62, signed, already signed, so you don't even have to be nice to him. And what we want to do is try and keep this as engaged as possible. And while Bob's talking, if you have a query, if there's something that you feel you want to unburden or you want a question about, raise your hand and we'll go to that. I think it's a lot more interesting than just a presentation and questions at the end. So, Bob, to you.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Lena, for a great organization of today's event. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you because we go all the way back to 1981, and even for me, it's a lot of time to go through. But this starts with a box of black and white film that was in my hallway, 2013, that was unedited and mostly unpublished. A box of 3-ring notebooks with contact sheets and black and white negatives attached in glassine envelopes to the rear of each contact sheet. So it's a lot of analog work to organize this, and it has to be done in an archival fashion, which is what I started in 2013, and this was the guinea pig for me to get my act together. And archives, just small note, are done to Library of Congress standards, so everything is extremely precise. And what I ended up finding, because when I was based in El Salvador, Time magazine was a weekly, still is, although it's online now. We sent up our film unprocessed from this airport to New York via Miami. And I never saw the film. I only heard about it from the editor over a telephone. Yes, it looks good. Yes, the flash is working. No, the shutter does not have a hole in it, and I have to go now. Have a meeting. That's basically all I heard at the end of each week. So my housemate was the Time reporter, so we collaborated on all the stories, and there was a massive civil war going on here. And this is a country the size of Massachusetts, densely populated, extremely poor, agricultural. Coffee, cotton, and sugarcane are the 3 main crops that are controlled, probably still now, by 14 families, the oligarchs. Essentially, the campesinos are slaves, maybe $1 a day. So you have trade unions, teachers, doctors, university professors, all part of the moderate to left wing trying to organize and improve the lifestyle, and being killed by the right-wing security forces and the oligarchs who don't want anybody rising in the food chain. So the Sandinistas in Nicaragua had taken power in 1979. It's to the south of El Salvador, or actually to the east. This is the Pacific. But do we have anybody here from Latin America? From Guatemala, or from Guatemala? Okay. So there was also a civil war in Guatemala, very lethal and very sinister. So this country had 55 U.S. advisors, military advisors, who were veterans of the Vietnam War. And I am a critic of the Vietnam War. I grew up during the Vietnam War, and I was in university, similar to you, and our protest was against the war in Vietnam, similar to what is going on in Gaza right now. Same kind of thing. Anger, frustration, disappointment, and parents who may not agree with us, for instance. Mine did. So I had to stay in school. If I dropped out, I would have been.
One more. Is this a quorum here? We have quorum. Come to the front, come to the front. The back seats are for people who pay especially high ticket prices. So Bob, we have a little surprise for you. This is Bob Nickelsberg, famous in Brooklyn for karaoke, and he's going to give us an example of his work today. Nina's got the tunes lined up. I think we're going to be good. Nobody told you? No?
No.
You didn't prep anything? I'm sorry.
Nothing.
Bob Nickelsberg is a photojournalist who has worked for some 30 years for Time magazine, primarily as a contract photographer. And he was based, in the beginning at least, in El Salvador. And he'll tell you in detail, but he's also done significant work in other places, and most especially Afghanistan. And he's going to show us his book, which you can see above us, and there's a couple of copies for sale at the student discount price of $62, signed, already signed, so you don't even have to be nice to him. And what we want to do is try and keep this as engaged as possible. And while Bob's talking, if you have a query, if there's something that you feel you want to unburden or you want a question about, raise your hand and we'll go to that. I think it's a lot more interesting than just a presentation and questions at the end. So, Bob, to you.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Lena, for a great organization of today's event. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you because we go all the way back to 1981, and even for me, it's a lot of time to go through. But this starts with a box of black and white film that was in my hallway, 2013, that was unedited and mostly unpublished. A box of 3-ring notebooks with contact sheets and black and white negatives attached in glassine envelopes to the rear of each contact sheet. So it's a lot of analog work to organize this, and it has to be done in an archival fashion, which is what I started in 2013, and this was the guinea pig for me to get my act together. And archives, just small note, are done to Library of Congress standards, so everything is extremely precise. And what I ended up finding, because when I was based in El Salvador, Time magazine was a weekly, still is, although it's online now. We sent up our film unprocessed from this airport to New York via Miami. And I never saw the film. I only heard about it from the editor over a telephone. Yes, it looks good. Yes, the flash is working. No, the shutter does not have a hole in it. And I have to go now, have a meeting. That's basically all I heard at the end of each week. So my housemate was the Time reporter, so we collaborated on all the stories, and there was a massive civil war going on here. And this is a country the size of Massachusetts, densely populated, extremely poor, agricultural. Coffee, cotton, and sugarcane are the 3 main crops that are controlled, probably still now, by 14 families, the oligarchs. Essentially, the campesinos are slaves, maybe $1 a day, So you have trade unions, teachers, doctors, university professors, all part of the moderate to left wing trying to organize and improve the lifestyle and being killed by the right-wing security forces and the oligarchs who don't want anybody rising in the food chain. So the Sandinistas in Nicaragua had taken power in 1979. It's to the south of El Salvador, or actually to the east. This is the Pacific. But do we have anybody here from Latin America? From Guatemala or from Guatemala? Okay. So there was also a civil war in Guatemala. Very lethal and very sinister. So this country had 55 U.S. advisors, military advisors, who were veterans of the Vietnam War. And I am a critic of the Vietnam War. I grew up during the Vietnam War. And I was in university, similar to you, and our protest was against the war in Vietnam, similar to what is going on in Gaza right now. Same kind of thing. Anger, frustration, disappointment, and parents who may not agree with us, for instance. Mine did. But so I had to stay in school. If I dropped out, I would have been in the building. Ectochrome could be processed in the building. Kodachrome was processed 20 miles away.
Bob's talking about slide film, which is color positive, so very bright, sharp, lovely colors, lovely acutants, as opposed to color negatives, which you come across still nowadays. But in those days, the professional film of choice for color was slide.
The ISO of Kodachrome was 64. You had no latitude. As you probably are familiar with ISO on your video or your chip camera, you had to be so precise. Every frame had to be metered. Black and white, which is what I had here, I shot 2 cameras of color, 1 camera of black and white, pretty much all the time. They said, well, we don't need your black and white, but it's okay to keep shooting it. So you have more flexibility. I mean, yes, things were done in the darkroom here to brighten this. No flash, but I could go in silently, go to an embassy function, and find the U.S. military attaché here getting grief from Nicolas Carranza, the head of the notorious death squads, asking for something. I didn't hang around long, but you can see with his hand gestures, he's asking for something. Military aid, more license to kill. Literally, they said, look, they're communists, we kill them. They're left-wing, we kill them. He took refuge in the United States in the 90s and ended up in Memphis as a janitor. So you can see his face, he's not buying whatever Carranza is asking for. But I would linger here for maybe 10 seconds and move. So on a Sunday, people went to the Pacific Ocean to get away from a civil war. And Salvador is still a destination for surfing. See, there are good waves. We go down for a beer and some fried fish, also to get away from the dust and the chaos of the city. And here's where we're talking about La Libertad. So here's the capital. Who knows what's going on in their mind, but they're actually quite at peace for that moment. But while we're in town, you go to the morgue. So yes, I'm warning you, there are some dead bodies that you're going to see here, but I call it presentable, but just so you know. This is the same town, maybe a mile from the beach. So what's happening here is family members notice that a few people didn't come home at night, that night. And they go to the morgue to see if they're there. There is no telephone system to the police station. And in fact, the last people you called about a crime would be the police. Now, what I think is going on here, and I've stared at this long enough that I believe he's just recognized this person. The facial features are similar. They're not here. And at that moment, so 1 mile away, you get this. You're never far away from death and destruction and violence in a civil war. But you have to go to the morgue. It's not an easy thing to get into your cycle of the day, but that's how our day started. The morgue.
Just feel free to ask questions, interrupt, ask for some clarification or whatever else.
What's important also is what your editors will tolerate for violence and physical violence. And this is not something I believe they would have published in time, but it is, in my opinion, acceptable. You put the body way off on the side. If you had cropped it here, you wouldn't know what he's really doing, other than probably looking at a body. But here, this is just enough to get the point across, to provoke a conversation. Over 70,000 civilians were killed in a 12-year civil war. Now, the reason I put this together is the film struck a chord that was what was happening back at this point relates to what's happening now with immigration. And this period of time forms the foundation for why people fled El Salvador, violence. And they came north through Texas, California, through Mexico. It's still going on. Obviously, the migration issue at the border is still a huge political issue. No one wants to solve it. But it's important for me that I could see relevance from back then. Graduates of West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy also wear a ring the size of this. It's just a small detail. You see that on their hand. They like to show their power. So the day after this picture, while we were here, actually, I'll back up. While we were here, he got word. Now I'll show you where this was taking place. Oops, sorry. Whoops. Out here in Huateca. Mazote is the scene of the massacre that he was responsible for. Huateca is in the mountains. He got word that his men had captured the rebel radio station and that he had to leave us. So right after this, he left in a helicopter, went to another location. They had something the size of a stereo set that they found in a cave. And this bothered the heck out of the military and the right wing, that this radio station would broadcast the left-wing position every day, every night. And all of these soldiers that they had killed, there was a propaganda war that was going on. So they wanted to capture the radio station. But what he didn't know is that it was filled with explosives. So the following day, they captured it, they celebrated, they went up into a helicopter, and at about 750 feet, the guerrillas triggered it and blew it up. So he came back in a lot of pieces, but they were watching him because he's responsible for that massacre. They targeted him. It took them 3 years to do this. It was actually a very clever thing.
Know your enemy, right?
Well, that's the way the game was played back then. So, in 1982, 4 Dutch journalists went to meet the guerrillas about 2 hours from the capital. They were followed, their phones were tapped in their hotel room. They came back in caskets. They were stopped at a roadblock 2 hours from the capital. They knew they were coming. They were taken up into the forest, shot, and then public announced that they were caught in crossfire, which we knew was not true. So now the trial is about to get underway of the commanding officer who controlled this operation. He was living in the United States for about 16 years, and he had amnesty back in San Salvador. But now it's been dropped and he's going to be tried. The Dutch family of one of these journalists, they work for a TV station, is funding the attorneys and the legal case, and it will move forward.
In El Salvador.
The suit will be filed in the US. I believe it will be done in El Salvador. Yes, they won't extradite him. They're trying to. And the Dutch now took this case very seriously. It was blatant what they had done. No one believed that they were caught in crossfire. But they were staying in my hotel. I came down at 9 o'clock in the morning, down the stairway overlooking the lobby, and I saw the 4 of them with their maps open. I knew what they were doing. It's not something you do in public. You don't open your maps during a civil war. It's obvious what you're up to. You don't need maps in this country. You just ask. And they were followed. Now this is again a way to present a brutal death. How do you show it? Don't show the head. It's something, a decision you have to make within seconds. So there were these small militia stations in rural villages. They were right-wing. The army never supported them, but gave them weapons. And the guerrillas attacked this outpost at night. You can see where the RPG, rocket-propelled grenade, landed, right here. They were killed instantly. This is almost an animation, the way a body gets blown back. So the Newsweek photographer and I, John Hoagland, would get up early, find out the reports, go out to these rural villages, because by 8 o'clock the bodies would be moved and the army would come back into town. You had to get there fast. National Security staff of the White House under Ronald Reagan, and very right-wing, and this is the US ambassador in El Salvador, Dean Hinton. It's like something out of Graham Greene novel in a linen suit. He was an amazing poker player.
And how do you know that?
Because I was told by the embassy staff that he got all of their money. And he smoked big cigars, and he's from Montana. So what's happening here, it took me a while to find out, a couple of decades actually, that she's come down here to fire him. He wasn't hardcore enough. We want more deaths. We want fewer communists in El Salvador. She moved in Pakistan, or had him moved, State Department. She's not really State Department, where he took over the Afghan war from Pakistan, where Greg has also worked. So you can see here again the U.S. presence. The only Salvadoran in the crowd is the foreign minister here, Chavez Mena. This is her retinue, her advisors, the policy wonks. He had a third wife who was Salvadoran. They thought he was going soft. They wanted it beefed up. Her main friend back in Washington was William Casey, the head of the CIA, who you've heard of. Another character out of a movie and out of the Vietnam War is Henry Kissinger. Are you all familiar with Henry Kissinger?
Yeah.
And again, look at the room in San Salvador at the palace. They take over. This is the president of El Salvador, Alvaro Magana. But he is down here to tell the Salvadorans at a press conference, please improve your human rights record and we will give you more military equipment. Because every 6 months, the aid package had to be approved. And they would wax over the slight improvement. Well, only 12 people killed this week. Last week it was 28. Yes, it's an improvement. But the military made sure they didn't listen to the Americans because they knew the aid would still come. They didn't have to listen to the Americans. And we become very cynical about these 6-month approvals. Nothing would be changed.
But I think, without doubt, there was a different channel of communication, right? This was not for the Salvadorians' consumption, this was for the American public.
Correct. And all the tripods from all the TV stations were there. CBS, NBC, ABC all had permanent offices at the hotel, main hotel. The wire services would report word for word what was said by Henry Kissinger. And here you have the head of the AFL-CIO, the labor union, Senator Jack Kemp from New York, former Buffalo Bill football player, Jim Wright, somewhere in the Midwest. This is the translator. So these were the congressional delegations that would travel around. And at the same time, the Contra War against the Nicaraguan was underway, and that was also part of their mission. So this airport was used to also supply clandestine military weapons to the Contras, this airport here. So a bit of the absurd, sort of cheerleaders, what would we call them? Majorettes.
Oh, drum major.
Drum majorettes at a military ceremony, something not very Salvadoran, but again, something you would not get if you flew in to do something else. This is part of your daily routine, to go to these ceremonies, to see what you find.
Can we just have a little pause there? So did you speak Spanish before you went? For the first time?
I did barely get through high school Spanish, but I went to Guatemala for a workshop for 7-8 weeks.
And then at university, what did you study? Was it linked to Latin
History and
America?
economics.
Oh, okay, so you were do you think you were ready? For
I
that?
understood it. I didn't understand photography very well.
Yeah, that's a secondary thing. But do you think you were ready to see the bigger picture being played out or not?
I think a lot of us at university were ready to see the bigger picture at that point in time of the unipolar world, Soviet Union versus the United States, the coup in Chile in '73, the coup in Guatemala in 1954. All of this had a big effect on us as students. We studied it. Not what was up this road, parked the car and walked up, and when we got to the Army position, the mortars were coming in, bracketed, getting closer and closer to us. The man on this side of the road that I went up to speak to ask him what was going on, fled as soon as I got to him. And right after that, a machine gun opened up on us from across the street, 50 feet away. an M60. And it got Hoagland in the spine. And the bullets went right across below my ankles. I pulled my feet in. And the CBS crew was down in this gully below it. I was in this kind of a brush right here. So CBS was hiding in this gully, screaming at the army that we're periodistas, journalists, don't shoot. March 16th, 1984. So I'd like to hear some questions from you. I think we should jump ahead, if that's okay.
Maybe let it roll while we talk. Maybe we can,
I can do that.
maybe Lena can let it roll and then you can ask her to pause. But that way you can engage with people asking questions while she rolls through the pictures. Is that okay?
Okay, sure, sure.
Oh, you're doing that. You can pause it. You can override it if you like. She's doing it, so.
Okay.
Questions, come. Oh, wait, sorry. Introduce yourself.
So my name's Adele. I'm a senior studying journalism and minoring PR. I have two questions for you. My first question is, what did you do to ensure that when you entered a space like this, that you approach this issue with sensitivity and empathy, knowing that you're covering probably one of the most traumatic moments in their lives? And my second question is, did you ever become desensitized to like the visuals of war? Because I know seeing this, at least for me, it's not easy to look at. So I can't imagine what that's like being on site and being there in person.
Those are two good questions. I would get out of the car carrying my cameras around my neck. It was obvious who we were. And I would introduce myself to villagers. Tell them, often we put TV with duct tape on our doors, or have a white flag, which meant not medical team, but who we were. And journalists were expected to come to these things. It was not unusual for us. And the local people, whether they're right-wing or left-wing supporters, would say, please, show the world what we are living through. This would often be crossfire that it had nothing to do with, but the bullets would go through the house and they'd be wounded. Please, show the world what we're living with. But we asked for permission, or told them who we were. You couldn't kick in the door. You had to be able to not burn your bridges with the local people. It didn't make sense. And whether there was a funeral, you would, before you start taking pictures, you would go to the family and say your condolences, and then say, I'd like to take some pictures. And just with a head, yes, go ahead. Becoming desensitized, well, this kind of an image would make me angry. So you'd resensitize yourself. And anger is something you work with. It drives you forward. You really dig down into your mind of what you want to visualize. I knew this weapon was not supposed to be there. He's not supposed to be there, publicly. So with anger, you create, you tell a story with emotion, your own emotion. It happens in a split second. But yes, after 100 days, I had to leave. I had to get out. 3 months. I was numb. I was floating. I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't care that much. And when you don't get out of the car anymore to take a picture, it's time to go. And it's a minimum of 5 days to calm down and then go back. Start it again. But 100 days was about my maximum. And I'd be angry, sullen, moody. Alcohol didn't help because the heat, you can't function with a hangover very easily on a regular basis. I can speak from experience, and I don't even have to ask my colleague here on my left. But it's part of it. You try. It doesn't work. But
Hi, I'm Bella. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming to talk to us today. I was just going to ask about that photo that you were just showing with the American general or advisor. Were you like instructed to not take photos of them by time, or was that like an overall?
In San Salvador, it was called Camino Real. And it had a big coffee shop, restaurant, and where often journalists would stay. The television stations and the wire service agencies were also on the second floor. They had offices there. So that was your gathering point every morning. You go there for coffee, go upstairs to talk to the wire agencies. What reports did they get overnight? Or at the end of the day, to come in and find out what you may have missed. So there was a hub of activity. And also, we're happy hour, it's 6 o'clock, where you meet new people who came in, find out who the new writers were that were coming in. Joan Didion showed up. You know, famous authors would stay at this hotel. So there was a magnet for you to be attracted to that one location. And I made a point of traveling with very few people that I could trust in a bad situation. And I ended up working for 2-3 years with John Hoagland from Newsweek. Even though we were competitors, he'd get out of the car and go this way, I'd get out of the car and go that way. It didn't matter to our editors, it just couldn't be the same picture. And there was competitive press conferences that I might say, John, sorry I couldn't tell you because I had the reporter, he wanted exclusive and he came late, Newsweek. The same thing would happen to me with his Newsweek reporter. They would have their own scoop. But the survival instincts are developed for making mistakes. They just can't be egregious mistakes. When you rent a car, the first thing you look at is not the gas gauge, it's the spare tire. And sometimes you have 2 spare tires. Because you're going down roads that there's nobody to fix a puncture. 2 spare tires. And you don't want to go with reporters who don't understand the 10 commandments of survival. Every 3 years I had a new reporter. It was literally getting somebody in kindergarten and putting them through high school in 3 years. I'd start all over again. Don't point. You go like this, where people are watching you, they know you're onto something. So you've seen it in movies where they tell each other, behind you right now is somebody with a gun. Don't all of a sudden turn. Because in 30 seconds that person will still be there with a gun. Or you say 9 o'clock, meaning on your left, or 3 o'clock on your right. But you just keep talking like the way we are right now. And we're talking about Lena over here, the woman in the white blouse. Don't look.
Don't look.
You see? It's these small mistakes which build up trust between the two of you that you can go out at 5:30 in the morning and Hoagland's rolling a joint on the way back. Always. Not on the way out.
My companions are doing the way out as well. Bad bunch.
That's just off the record. But so you know what we're talking about. So at lunch, it's a dry lunch. Tortillas, avocado, and frijoles. That's it. You know, nothing big. Just keep moving. Have water. But really, the spare tire, that's carried me for 40 years. First thing you look for is your spare tire.
Nice. Thank you. Good question.
Hey, Andrew. Oh, just push it. There you go.
Hey, I'm Andrew. When you're in El Salvador, I guess there's a lot of areas like this. You have all these nooks and crannies, and the kind of like the geography, the terrain is really difficult. What are your kind of your steps, things that you run to learn the geography, the terrain of the place that you're in when you're going to a new place to cover conflict?
Well, I'll give you an idea. There are rivers all over the place, and during the rainy season, you're not going to be able to cross. So, how do you get across? You have to know the terrain, and you very often travel with the locals or ask the farmers or the bus drivers coming into the city as you were going out at 8 o'clock in the morning. They probably started at 5:30 in the morning picking up people. What's going on up the road? Are the guerrillas out there? Are they stopping trucks? Because it's a strike. They're burning trucks. If truck drivers are carrying stuff and the strike is called to shut down the economy, you want to get to that point. That's how it's 2 tin cans and a string kind of analog, how you communicate. You have to figure out there are no payphones. We didn't have cell phones.
I strongly advise you to go to the website and see Bob's other work. And also look at, and it's quite interesting to see the color work, the parallel color work, and he's got some up on the website from Salvador.
And Guatemala.
I didn't look at the Guatemala color. So, you know, and then think about comparing that work to his contemporaries, and think about how you can find your niche in a story that you find interesting. Thank you, Bob. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Greg.